Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. I'm actually out on the road and doing some motorcycling, not just talking about over pictures of cars. I'm prompted to make this video after watching a video from Auto Expert. That's a fellow called John Cadogan who has a channel called Auto Expert, and if I remember I'll put a link in the description where you can check out his video. He talked about some patents that Ford have recently applied for, hence the title of this video, and I'll come back and talk about those patents in a little while, but I'm going to do a couple of other things first of all, and hopefully tie it all together. First of all, I don't think I'm stealing any of John Cadogan's content. My assumption is that people who subscribe to my channel may not subscribe to his channel and may not be aware of it. So I've taken what he's talked about and given it my own little twist, and used it as a way of informing people about this development. So what I'd like to do first is take a little trip down memory lane, and that is I'd like you to think about the different things that have been in cars over the years as ways of entertaining us. Now, I don't know exactly when radios first started to appear in cars, but I have a recollection that in the early to mid-60s radios were not standard in all cars. And at the time, Holden in Australia, for example, sold their cars in three trims. There was the Standard, the Special and the Premier. And I think it might have only been the Premier that got the radio as a standard feature. But sometime after that, radios began to appear in cars, and so we had music to entertain us. But then, of course, we only had the AM band and mostly only stations in the metropolitan area. There were knobs to tune in stations, and if you were outside the metropolitan area, you hoped you could tune into a station and perhaps pick up a bit of music or entertainment for the next stage of your trip or whatever it was. At some time in the 70s, I think, FM radio came into existence, and so we had now two bands and a whole bunch more stations and a whole lot more annoying, senseless banter, but nevertheless more options of things to listen to and enjoy while we're in the car. Then came the cassette, or the 8-track cartridge. The 8-track cartridge, I think, became the Betamax of the music business. The cassette was the more popular way of doing things, but the cartridge might have given better sound quality. And the cassette was fine until the cassette got chewed up by the machine and then eventually ruined your player as well, so you couldn't play any more tapes. Not long after that, or sometime after that, in the early mid to late 80s, I think, the CD players started to appear in cars. And everybody had CD players. And then at some stage you were able to Bluetooth your MP3 player. Nowadays nobody has CDs and nobody has MP3 players because everybody has radios, everybody has all their music on a phone, or they pay a subscription to Spotify or something like that. Nowadays, of course, instead of having radios, we have these ubiquitous infotainment screens. And I've talked a lot about the distractibility of infotainment screens in other videos, but this time I'm talking about their entertainment value. And the infotainment screen, either with the apps that come with it or through the apps that are on your phone, allows you to either listen to the radio, AM, FM or digital, allows you to listen to podcasts, audio books, or a specially curated music playlist that you've got by paying a subscription to Spotify or some other service like that. Now the point is, I guess, that many people don't listen to the radio in their car anymore. They have their own entertainment, which, as I said, would be a podcast or an audio book or a music list that they've stored on their phone or curated from Spotify, and they do that in part because they want to be entertained and they don't want to be distracted by advertising. And they know that wherever they go, the music's always going to be there, or the podcast or whatever it is not going to fade out because they're too far from the coverage of the radio station or something like that. Now hold on to all those thoughts about what entertainment sources there are in your car while I talk about another thing that's in cars. A little while ago I made a video about Chinese cars and their reliability and issues associated with that, and at the time I made mention of the fact that some people were disinclined to buy Chinese cars, in particular the GWM Aura, which is their small to mid-size electric SUV crossover something or other, They were reluctant to buy this car because there's a driver fatigue camera on the driver's right-hand A pillar, on the driver's A pillar. And there were people who were convinced that the camera wasn't there to monitor driver fatigue, it was there to collect data about them and ship it back to Xi Jinping in Beijing or the Chinese Ministry of State Security. Now, when I first heard that theory, I was tempted to run into the kitchen and grab hold of the aluminium cooking foil and make a hat for my head. But I realised that, in fact, there may have been some validity to it, but my concern ought not to have been about collecting data and sending it back to Beijing and the Ministry of State Security, but sending it back to Detroit, which will bring me to Ford in a moment. But so many cars these days do in fact have driver fatigue cameras, and of course those cameras do collect data about you. They collect data about your eye movements and your head movements, and when in the opinion of the camera and the software that operates it, you're not paying sufficient attention to the road, it starts beeping at you, warning you to wake up and pay attention to the road. Now, I wondered why, when I heard these theories about data being sent back to Beijing, why anyone in the Ministry of State Security in China would be interested in the driving habits of somebody in an obscure, unknown town in New South Wales who was going to the gym and going shopping and picking up their kids from school or whatever it was they were doing in their aura. But as I said, I should have been more concerned about what data might have been being shipped back to Detroit. And as I said, that brings me back to Ford. Now, John Cadogan, the auto expert, in his video talked about Ford applying for a patent for a system that will allow them to basically push out advertising through the car's infotainment system. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. You are sitting in your car. The one place that you can now go, because you don't listen to the radio and you've got your podcast on your audio book, and so you're not bombarded with advertising. So the one place you could go and get in your car and drive around and just be entertained, not be interrupted by gambling ads, not be interrupted by ads exhorting you to go to furniture retailers or electrical retailers and buy goods you didn't need, or take a stop at the Golden Arches and get a coffee you didn't need on the way. Just a place where you could turn up the music and enjoy it, or enjoy the audio book, or listen to the podcast and think about what the points that are being made and nod along with them and form your own arguments and imagine yourself being interviewed and how you might answer a question. And now you're going to be bombarded with advertising that's provided to you by Ford. Now, I can see some viewers saying, well, I'll just turn it off. The patent for the system indicates that it is impossible to turn it off. It cannot be turned off. Not like the lane keeper assist or the speed sign alert sign, speed sign alert beep. The advertising cannot be turned off. You could say, well, I won't buy a Ford. I'll just buy another car or drive another car. And my response would be, well, if Ford are doing this, you could assume that the other manufacturers are doing it or working on the same idea. And why? Because it raises revenue. And how it raises revenue I'll come back to in a moment. And then you could say, well, I didn't agree to this. Why wasn't I told about this? I didn't agree to this. I don't accept that. And Ford and their dealer will tell you, well, in fact, when you signed the contract, there was a little box that said, I agree to the terms and conditions. And you tick that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sold you the car. And the infotainment system wouldn't work. But the terms and conditions was a 1,200-page document, so of course you didn't have the time to read it, and you wouldn't have read it anyway. It's like the terms and conditions when you get new software for your phone, for your computer, or an update to an app on your phone. If you don't agree to it, you don't get the software, therefore the app doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So you're kind of obliged to say, well, I agree to it. No matter what it is, I agree to the terms and conditions. So you've agreed that Ford can now send advertising to you in your car. They say, well, it'll be an ad every 5 minutes or something. And how will it work? Well, as I said, first of all, the camera that's in the car, the one that is there to monitor your driver fatigue, it'll collect data about you. It'll collect not only data about whether you're paying attention to the road or not, but using some sort of facial recognition software, I suspect, an AI, it'll work out approximately how old you are. it'll work out what your gender is. I know other people don't use that word, but gender means gender to me, and male and female are still words I understand, so I'm going to say those words. So it'll work out your approximate age, it'll work out your gender, and it'll start sending advertising to you based on those things. When you use the GPS in the infotainment system, if it's provided, or if not, if you connect your phone to the infotainment system and use Google Maps, the car will collect data on where you go. And so that data will then influence the advertising that's sent to you. And if you frequently go to certain cafes or certain shops or whatever, then you'll get advertising that reminds you and promotes those shops and cafes and whatever. As the software gets to know, the camera and the software gets to know you better, and you think, well, I'll stop that, I won't connect my phone. Then how will you listen to your podcast? How will you listen to your audiobook? How will you use the GPS if you don't do that? Because remember that as soon as you get into your car, your phone is going to try and Bluetooth connect, or however it works, with the infotainment system, because that's what it's supposed to do. So all of this data is going to be collected about you, and it's gathered somehow and shipped back to Detroit to the Ford head office. And what do Ford do with it? They raise revenue with it. And how do they raise revenue? They sell that information to potential advertisers, insurance companies, to remind you to renew your car insurance or to investigate a different quote. Based on the data they collect about where you go, there will be advertisements for shops that you might go past on the way, based on your age and your gender and various other things like that. There'll be all sorts of advertising that's targeted at you, that's based on the data that's collected by Ford and sent to Detroit and then sold to interested parties. Now think about this for a moment. You're thinking, well, these ads might... Ford says that first of all, the ads will come about one out every 10 minutes or every 5 minutes or something like that. So you're in the middle of enjoying your podcast, or you're at the exciting part of your audio book, or you're just singing along karaokeing with the songs in your playlist, and suddenly there's an ad comes on inviting you or reminding you what the odds are for the 6th race at Flemington, or what are the odds for the upcoming big match between the two teams that you've never heard of and don't care very much about, but nevertheless that ad's coming over your infotainment system now, interrupting the flow of your thought and interrupting your enjoyment of your thing. You might think, well, the ad's only 15 seconds or 30 seconds, but it's going to continue. It's going to happen all the time, every 10 minutes, and then it'll be every 5 minutes, and then it'll be one ad, and then it'll be 2 ads, and then 3 ads. And it'll end up like a reality TV program where there are so many ads in the break that when they come back after the break, there's got to be a recap to remind the viewers, well, what were they doing before they went to the ad break? What was the bloke cooking? Or what room were they renovating? Because you've been bombarded with 15 to 20 ads and you've forgotten what the program was all about. But that's not the issue so much as to say, it's your car. It was the place where finally you could escape advertising. You can't escape it on radio anymore. You can't escape it on television anymore, not even on cable TV. The only way you can avoid it on TV is if you pay for streaming services. And even some of them now say, well, if you're prepared to pay, if you're prepared to have advertising during your streaming, you can get a lower rate. You once were able to escape it by watching SBS or the ABC, but then the government decided they didn't want to fund SBS as much anymore. So they said you could have ads. First of all, the ads were meant to be at natural breaks in the program or at the end of the program before the next program started. Then the government said, well, you can have the ads whenever you want, but the ads were meant to be limited to only 2 per break or something. And then they changed that rule and said, well, you can have as many ads as you want whenever you want them. So the ABC for television entertainment is the only place you can go to avoid advertising. So think about this. You've bought a car. The dealer hasn't told you at the time that this is a feature of the car. He hasn't told you because you haven't asked, and he hasn't told you because if he did tell you, you'd say, well, I don't want that. I'm not going to buy the car. But as I said, if you don't you can't say you don't want it because it's built in and you can't turn it off. You could say, well, I don't want that car and I'll go down the road and buy a different brand. But as I said, if Ford are doing it, you can assume that all the other manufacturers are also going to do it. So going down the road to buy another brand or a different model won't make any difference. It'll be there whether you are in your Ford, your Toyota, your Mazda, or whatever it is. Now, Ford is saying, well, just because we've applied for a patent for this doesn't mean we're necessarily going to apply it to all our cars. And I can again hear my viewers saying, yeah, right. Of course it means that they're going to employ it or deploy it into their cars, just not yet. They're going to wait a while and they're going to try it in some cars. They're going to be patient and they're going to wait a while and then they'll sneak it into some cars. And before you know it, it'll be there and it'll just be a feature. And you'll say, oh, well, it's just a feature of the car and I just have to put up with it now. But as I said, the point is, you didn't ask for this. You were not consulted as to whether it was something that you wanted. You've just been told, well, this is now a feature of the car, like the engine, the brakes and the tyres and the suspension and so on. This is a feature. It can't be turned off and you're stuck with it. The questions about data gathering and invasion of your privacy and selling information about you to third parties without your consent doesn't seem to have entered the equation at all. Ford don't seem to have given any thought to it. They thought, here's an idea. Let's see if we can put ads in our cars. Let's see if on the basis of the data we collect, we can personalise the advertising to the person in the car. And let's see if we can make some money out of selling the data we collect. What about their privacy? Well, what about it? It doesn't matter. So your privacy, your data, your information that you have not consented to being gathered and sold is now a commodity that is being used to enrich the stockholders of Ford, but is of no concern to them and apparently of no concern to anyone else. Now, governments could, at some point when this system gets deployed, say, well, it has to be turned off. It has to, the viewer, the owner of the car has to have the option of turning this thing off. But I suspect they won't do that. The government could legislate to say the viewer has to have the option of opting out and saying, well, I don't want that in the car, and therefore the manufacturer has to disable it at the point of sale. But I don't expect that to happen either. The government could legislate to say, well, there has to be an option within, if the advertising is going to be there has to be an option like there is on YouTube to say, skip the ad after the first 3 or 4 seconds. But I suspect that won't be there either. And even if it was, it's probably not a good idea, because you'd be looking at the screen now waiting for the skip ad, so you can tap the screen and say skip ad. And while you're doing that, your eyes are off the road and therefore you're not paying close attention to the road, and that becomes a safety hazard. So I started this by asking you to think about things that were in the trip down memory lane of what sort of things have been in your car to entertain you. We thought it was great when there was music and we could turn on and hear our favourite top 40 tunes or our favourite news broadcast or current affairs program on the radio, book reviews, whatever it was that people listened to in the radio. And then we thought, okay, there are now AM stations, talkback radio, and there's FM radio where they just play music and so on. And then there were cassettes where we could just make our own mixtapes and put those in, and that was great. And then there was CDs, so all that high quality music that we had on CDs at home, we could copy it and put all those CDs in the car and play the music when we were out on the road. And then came the infotainment screen, and not only could we have all of those options and some other radio options like digital radio that we didn't have before, we could have podcasts, audio books, Spotify curated lists, music lists and so on. And then, without any consultation with the car buying public or the customer, one company, but in brackets understand that all the other companies are going to be doing the same, said, well, if they're going to have all of that, if we're going to put this screen in the car, let's put some advertising in there as well. It just seems like there's nowhere you can go to escape the commercialisation. There's nowhere you can go to escape the idea that everywhere you go, someone wants you to part with your money, whether you need to part with your money and buy things, whether you need to buy them or not. The car might have been the last refuge, the last bastion of where you could go and escape all that, but that doesn't appear to be the case any longer. All right, well, that's my take on what Ford will think of. Ford, what will they think of next? I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have a comment, please feel free to add it. And when I become aware of it, I will reply or react to your comment. I hope you've enjoyed either the commentary or the scenery or both, and I will catch you in the next motorcycle or running video. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.